Anthony from MRTN. How are you going?
I'm going really well, Dave. Thanks very much for having us along. I'm
No,
not
no
sure if
problem.
I've got much words of wisdom, but maybe it's a lesson on
For
what not to do.
for the Architecture for Marketing podcast. No, I completely disagree because you managed to have built a very, very well-known architecture practice from a person who doesn't consider yourself much of a marketer at all. But I see all the sort of subtle marketing moves you're making. So I think that's what we want to kind of find out more about. Um,
You tell me
but
what
you
they
were
are.
you were mentioning before we jumped on the call that you were finding the start of this new year quite busy.
Yeah.
How are things out there for kind of smaller residential practices in Melbourne at the moment?
I mean, I can really only speak for myself, I think. I haven't
Mm,
had the chance to catch up with many people yet, but I think it's pretty common. And that what a lot of people have found is that people have spent a lot more time at home and are starting to, think about their homes differently and maybe more time to go, well, we should perhaps start thinking about that job we were going to do, or even movements in real estate have actually been happening. So, at the beginning of last year, there was a bit of a freak out, and, we had a couple of jobs go on hold. But after that, everyone was like, no, let's keep going. And then, pretty steadily new inquiries have been coming through. So it's very reassuring at the moment. I just sort of feel like, yeah, at least the next 6 months are planned out, and
yeah,
that's it's just a lucky place to be in. If you're really
yeah.
fortunate.
So you're feeling a little bit more confident. And when those leads are coming in, you mentioned that you're getting the impression that it's because people maybe are starting to become a bit more appreciative of the importance of their home and where they live. Is that something that you're directly hearing in those initial conversations with new clients when they're speaking to you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think there's been a bit of a surprising amount of real estate movement as well. Like
Yeah.
people have been buying places, so there must
Mm.
be a bit of opportunism that's going on,
Yep.
which I applaud. That's good. But definitely those initial conversations are more about, well, now we're going to be working from home, or that can think of people thinking about their homes in
Mm.
quite different ways, which has been great because that's what we've been sort of advocating. And a lot of our work, in all our houses, we try and discuss very long-term strategies and different living type arrangements and how things might change. So it's almost like now people are like nodding a bit more, intuitively into those things that we're saying, because they're like, yeah, they've seen it happen in the past year. So it's interesting. It's good.
I'm always interested when there's a bit of a swell of new inquiries. Kind of, are they different? Are they like a new breed of client after events like this? Are you getting surprised by some of those conversations that you're having? But I think the main thing I'm kind of interested in is how long do you think that these clients have been aware of your practice for before they've contacted you? Is it something where you're feeling, because you're mentioning these property moves, and sometimes that makes people act on things quite quickly and quite spur of the moment. Are you getting a sense that people are being a bit more spontaneous than they would have been in the past? Or is it the same sort of thing where they're kind of familiar with your work and it's this sort of ongoing appreciation that's been developing over time?
And I guess you're always trying to pick apart those
Yeah.
trends to see, what you could do better or differently, or how projects are coming to you now relates to how you can get future projects, right? So that's often part of the thinking, and definitely, like I ask people where it's come from and how they've thought of us. So obviously, there's the referred to somebody or passed in the street. You can't control that at all. That's a sort of a random encounter. But there is a couple of trends that I think come through. One is that that when you have a wider body of work of different types of projects, then people do remember them, right? So if they start to do a particular type of project, they can refer to a project of yours. They seem to remember it, be able to go back to it, and then bring it forward. Or else there's a sort of a random coincidence that occurs, and then they're like, oh yes, that's right. We'd seen your project that a couple of years ago, and it does go back to a couple of years. Like we still get people referring to the Fairfield Hacienda project, which was one of our first projects. Um, but just recently, I've been noticing there's a few people that have come through on the mid-century modern
Mm.
enthusiasts. and they don't have mid-century modern houses to renovate. There's a few that do, but they like that aesthetic, or they like those type of projects. And that's related, I think, to our mid-century modern Frankston project, which really we sort of marketed sort of in two bursts, actually. That was kind of interesting. A year ago and 2 years ago. So that would seem to be a time frame when people have been familiar with the project, and then it's come to that when they are ready to do their projects, that they're now doing it.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because there's a bit of a news cycle, a social media cycle, and a news cycle that applies to architecture as well. And so many projects coming out on a daily basis. It sort of makes you wonder how somebody could be discovering a project that's 2 years old in today's environment, wherever they're getting their information about architecture from. Is it the magazine on the coffee table at the dentist clinic in the waiting room, or is it, or are they like going down your Instagram feed, scrolling down 150 posts? I mean, how do you think? Obviously, it's a major benefit to you that they are still remembering these earlier projects.
Yeah.
Could it just be that these clients of yours just have fantastic, incredible memories, and they're just holding on to these things for a long time?
Yeah, maybe it's just aesthetic memory, they've got architects type memories.
Yeah.
Interestingly, that project hasn't been imprinted all.
Yeah.
So actually, no, I lied. That was in the local project, was in the interiors one. So possibly from that. The strategy that we actually used for that project, which I was hesitant about, but I think worked quite well, is that when the project was finished, it was beautifully finished, but there was a landscape that went in that obviously took about a year to kick in.
Yeah.
So we actually decided, I got it photographed, just the interiors, and instructed the photographer they couldn't take any exteriors at all. So that was that. And so then I got a sort of a social media and sort of marketing push just of the interiors, which came over great. And then 1 year later, I then got Derek to photograph the whole project. So then I sort of got the 2 bites of a cherry. And so I was hesitant, because I thought that, that maybe it was a bit saturated, but it seemed to actually get a second life, which worked quite well.
Oh,
so
that's excellent.
That was quite good.
I just put out an interview with Anthony Richardson from the Designer Motive Instagram account and YouTube channel, and he was suggesting, particularly on this issue of how long it takes for landscapes to establish themselves. He was a strong advocate for doing exactly what you just suggested, starting with the interiors and then coming back for the exteriors, because you're really missing out if you postpone the whole thing for 12 months. So I was actually going to ask, because you did mention we had sort of we re-released the project a year later. So that's what you're referring to. You didn't sort of treat the original photos as new again? Was it sort of a separate release? These are the exteriors, those were the interiors, or did you say, hey, it's the interiors again, and just sort of,
Yeah, I just totally did it, because I didn't Dave Gliska, he just photographed the interiors the first time, and then Derek did exteriors and interiors. So not only was I able to sort of do the whole thing over again, completely different photos. And it was that sort of interesting thing, like you often wonder how different photographers see the same project. Like, it was actually great to see 2 different sets of photographs of the interiors, and they did read quite differently. So I think it was still relatively fresh, for how the interiors came across.
When you must have been dealing with a bit of a problem when you just had the interiors, in terms of planning out how you were going to pitch the project to publications and magazines, right? They have, I guess, a preference for full projects where they can see the interior and the exterior. Were you limited in any way in terms of what you could do with that initial? So we've got social media, and then in terms of media, did you wait until you had all the photos before you put the rest of the project out?
Yeah, so I mean, that I think you do handicap yourself a little bit with that. So initially, I had worked with the local project, so Aiden, over there, they're really great. Those guys, I really like working with them. So they had taken on just the interiors, and they said they would market that, put that forward, and possibly put it into print as well, which they did. But then I think that second time round, you're not really going to get it printed again, because the print publications, they do have the thing of, well, everyone's kind of seen this already, so they're not so keen on it. So that was kind of like a calculated risk, I guess, in was okay with that.
Yeah. I want to kind of jump over to photography a bit because you did bring it up, and I think that's something that really differentiates you from a lot of other firms that are similar size or in the same sort of market, which is like you scroll down your Instagram feed and it's just a who's who of big hitting architectural photographers from project to
Yeah,
project. Derek Sauer,
yeah,
Tatiana Plitt, Peter Bennett, Shannon McGrath, Simon Wilson, Nick Granleys. It's just like you've just got the it's like the Academy Awards of Australian architectural photographers going down
yeah,
your list. And you mentioned you like to sort of mix it up and create a little bit of variety in the photographers that you work with. So talk me through that. Why, obviously you're making some pretty substantial, you're putting some substantial resources and effort and love into the photographers that you're working with. You're working with amazing photographers. So talk me through your thought process around photography and shooting your projects and picking photographers. I'm just fascinated to sort of see what
yeah.
see what your approach is.
Okay. So I think it's twofold. So one is there is, I think there's a suitability of particular photographers to projects, right? So you can see like, Peter Bennett's, he's an amazing, very experienced photographer, and he's really good when you're sort of getting people in, and the way he works through a project's really great. Tatiana's like beautiful interior shots with the light is fantastic. So they all kind of have strengths that I think that are
Yeah.
quite clear in their photography. So sometimes I sort of pick from a photographer based on the project. So when we got Derek to redo Frankston Mid-Century, there was that kind of thought that he'd done a lot of that Los Angeles photography.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And there was the Los Angeles mid-century modern narrative that we brought into that project. So I thought it'd be quite interesting to pair the experience he had with those types of projects into ours. So that's part of it, but that's not the whole story. It's just that thing of I do find photo shoots really stressful. So it's always a guaranteed sleepless night beforehand. But also, it's our last bit with the project. Often it's the sort of last time that you get to spend a bit of time there. In fact, often it's the only time you get to spend a whole day there. So I like that kind of, I was going to say to make a bit of a hobby of it. That's not really the right kind of term. I like to sort of create an experience around the photo shoot itself. And part of that is just working with different photographers, just sort of seeing how they come to it, how they approach the project, how they interact with you, how they frame a shot, or all those sorts of things. So, I'm sure there's a benefit to just working with a single photographer and getting to understand each other. But I do quite like the variety that's created through different photographers.
So you do it for your own entertainment.
Exactly. It's
Like
all about me.
I like to mingle and network with all
Yeah.
my favorite photographers that I follow on Instagram.
Exactly.
So every new project is an opportunity to meet one of them. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's
That's
it.
great.
I think also because every photographer has their specific sort of way that they frame and shoot a project, I'm a little hesitant to have all the projects looking as if they're shot through the same lens as well.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of a gut reaction, I guess, to what how I think the project should come across. Not really any particular marketing sensibility, I think, for that one.
Well, it's quite interesting because I think like if you're going to be kind of academic about the marketing side, you might assume that consistency is going to be beneficial. So having that one photographer do everything in a similar style, it starts to become part of your brand identity. But what's kind of interesting about your account is that you don't get that sense of it being chaos of all these different styles and looks and everything. It's like your photographers have managed to keep it very consistent. I mean, does that just happen on its own, or is that it's just an accident? What sort of how do you find your portfolio looks when you look through it? Do you think, oh, that's sticking out to me as a Derek photo, that's a Shannon photo, or are you like kind of they all just feel natural, they feel together like a family at this point?
No, I do perceive differences. There's like these kind of groups of photographers, I think, and their styles, and it's particularly to do with well, so that difference. I find there's a big difference between how photographers shoot interiors and then the exteriors, right? And that
Yeah.
it's there's a difference. Like I find that the good interior photographers are not necessarily so strong on exteriors, and vice versa. So
Yes.
that comes into it. And also, I quite enjoy the difference between the photographers that really spend a lot of time framing a shot, and bracketing it, and then a lot of post production to it, versus the other photographers that work a bit quicker, and move around and get a lot more shots.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I prefer one over the other. I just appreciate the differences between the two.
Yeah. That's interesting. Do you think so? There's a good connection there. So you've got Derek's got, for example, that 50s that 50 series that he has done, that modernism classic stuff is an awesome project he's been working on. You pair him up with your kind of modernist project, and then you end up attracting these modernist, sycophant clients who
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely love it. These enthusiasts. Um, is there any possibility that that person could have even potentially come through Derek's audience, through potentially through social media to you? Is there like do you
Yeah.
sort of do you find or think a bit about the kind of the promotional benefit of working with Instagram photographers? I say Instagram photographers who have Instagram accounts who, if we added up their audiences, we're probably looking at 1 million followers here collectively as a group. Do you find that as far as growing your social media audience, it's quite beneficial, the that investment of who you're working with, it helps you along?
I actually, I sort of have an expectation that with the photographers that I use, that they're going to promote the photos they've done for me through their social media. So
Mm,
I would expect them to do that. And I also would hope that they often have very good connections to print and other media,
yeah,
and they will often offer to make a connection as well. So that's important, that
yeah.
photographers bring that to it as well.
That's a really big value add that a really
Mhm.
experienced architectural photographer can bring, and particularly one that's well known and has a good reputation, right? Versus somebody who might be proficient at taking photos, maybe even proficient at taking architectural photos, but they don't have that extra layer necessarily that you benefit from.
Absolutely. I mean, and you really want a photographer that's really imbued in that world.
Mm,
But they're not sort of architecture product people, advertising photographers. That they're really sort of architecture,
yeah,
archi nerd
yeah.
photographers. So
That's
it's,
actually
it's
interesting. That are you afraid of the archi nerds? You don't. You're happy. You don't mind. You're not going. I need it. There's a bigger world out there than the archi nerds. Do you find that's an audience that you don't sort of shy away from? Going like, this is architecture for people who love architecture, shot by people who love architecture, published by publications that love architecture. It's all just that. And is that something that what are your feelings towards that? Because some architects are a little bit, I don't really want to just, go on in the vacuum chamber with the other architects. I want to be thinking about the bigger picture. But do you think it really works that way, or is it, what's your sort of
When you
thoughts?
say, are you referring to like the sort of the Instagram enthusiasts that are like
Yeah,
tracking
I
you
mean,
along? That
that
they're
the
kind of
the architecture people.
the
There's
no, the architects or just the fans?
the
Is
architects.
it both?
Yeah, no, look, I'm not necessarily making a distinction, but there's this. Sometimes the architects and the architecture fans are, they're a very similar group of people, but there is often sort of this, I guess, in the approach to media, social media, photography, marketing, whatever. I do hear from a lot of architects who say like, look, there's this whole architecture thing going on, and I'm more interested in the general public, right? Whatever that means. Okay, so the people that are not sort of following the architecture crowd. They're not influenced by what's kind of going on in architecture. Whereas you seem to really approach it like, no, I like the magazines. I like the really good architecture websites. I look up to and respect the prominent architectural photographers. So there's this, you tend to lean more that way. So do you have any kind of, I guess, point of view on, as far as getting your work out to people who aren't just other architects or architecture students? Do you think are you able to debunk the idea that it's impossible to do that while concentrating on the architecture media and the architecture world? Like, there are still potential clients in there, right? And ordinary people, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I guess I haven't thought about it like that too much, but I think sort of just how it works when I'm putting forward projects is that I tend to just my imagined audience really is fellow architects, and like it probably
Oh,
shouldn't be, probably
controversial.
should be.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's why I'm asking. I think that would be putting it right to the pointy bit going, do you
yeah,
shy away from thinking about the fact that you're promoting your work in a way that is just absolutely tantalizing to other architects
yeah.
versus thinking just about, Tom and Sally sitting on the couch at home doing whatever in the broader market, right? So that is so interesting. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah.
You're not scared of the
So
other
I
architects.
no, because and one thing is like I really love the cohort of architects that we're involved with. Like I really enjoy the collegiate aspect to it,
Yeah.
and I really love seeing other people's work, and it really sticks with me. Like and I love that by having my own practice, I'm part of that conversation. Right, that's
Yeah.
an amazing thing to be part of. So I think that when my sort of imagined audience, I think that probably is a lot of other architects, and that's what I'm sharing projects with. But thinking about it, part of that too is you're not talking down to Tom and Sally on the couch at home, right?
Yeah.
You're speaking to those potential clients or just enthusiasts as if they're also, a fellow architect,
Yeah.
or architecturally interested, and sort of can engage with the sort of ideas and the concepts and the broader intentions of projects and all those kind of things. So
Yeah.
there's probably, a little bit of a benefit. Well, there's probably a side part of editing the communication in that way, and that you are keeping it at a pretty high level of conversation rather than bringing it down.
Well, that's so interesting because I mean that's such a strong argument for why it's actually good to imagine your imagined audience in the way you put it that way, being other architects for that very reason. It kind of keeps you from condescending, right? Or assuming an audience that has no interest in architecture, which could be a big mistake when your ultimate goal is, hey, I want to work with people who are interested in
Yeah,
architecture. you know,
yeah, yeah.
and
I think
in
that's
thinking
probably
about
it.
your practice, that's who I imagine your clients are. People that have at some level an interest, a passion. That I'm imagining what their library looks like, what their bookshelf looks like, and I'm thinking I'm going to be seeing some good architecture books there. Would that be kind of generally the right kind of, and part of that's because of the way that you communicate and put your message and your projects out there, and you direct it towards people who share your thinking about architecture.
I think you couldn't be more wrong.
Really?
Yeah,
Whoa,
yeah. I
flipping it
think
around.
that.
Okay, okay. Talk me through that because that's
Yeah,
really really interesting, and I'm happy to be wrong. So I've got that kind of
no,
assumption there, but
that's right.
so can we need to
And
completely break
I've actually
apart
been
this
thinking
idea?
it. I've been thinking about that a bit recently. Like not to stereotype, but if you're to categorize the clients and put them into different sections, and I think there probably is that perception, especially when you get that architectural photography and everything's all cleared out and neat. There is that, and I'm a little bit hesitant about it. There is that sort of look that all the clients must be very design savvy, subscribe to all the
Mm,
magazines, and know all the different terminology. Um, and yeah, while we've got a couple of clients that are like that, the Frankston mid-century clients were just amazingly well, intuitive and well educated on it. 75%, I would say, are not. Like they're
mm.
sort of enough to have a passing interest, but not. They don't have the coffee table books of
Not
architecture.
right.
They don't.
Okay.
But I guess it's that thing of, when you go to buy a new sofa and you go around and have a look at some showrooms, and very quickly you get pretty conversant about a foam and a foam cushion with duck feathers on it, and the leather and fabric. Like, I
Yeah.
guess there's that quick sort of assembling of information that you need to get when you're going to engage an architect. And then for most clients, there's that bit of relief actually about, okay, now we pass the project over to you. and you take us on the journey. You continue our education rather than us just randomly acquiring things as we go forward. And I think the part of that is, we are big believers that sort of architecture is for everybody, but
Yeah.
most of our clients have a very practical need. They don't have a published in a glossy magazine need. They have a need to change their living arrangements or for a new house, and they need an architect to get that built. So we're satisfying that need. We're not satisfying a need of people saying, we'd like to have a house that wins an award and gets published.
Yeah.
So that really comes up.
That's so interesting. And I'm just sort of, the part that makes me kind of wonder is just, so they are people that they're not the coffee table book types. They are kind of, they're getting a bit of a crash course when they go into that kind of consideration stage, and they're thinking, okay, let's just see which architects are out there. They're quickly piecing together everything from different places. My question is how they end up finding such a good architecture firm. It's kind of like, how do they end up picking your practice? Like, how are they that good at it as beginners is my thing. So that's where I start assuming, they must be, turtlenecks and coffee table books and,
Yeah.
members of the Boyd Society and everything, and volunteer at
Yeah.
art galleries, but they're not those people. They're normal people. They have a practical need, and they come to you. And that must be interesting, particularly as you obviously start your practice, and word of mouth is more important. But then I guess over time, the media is more important. The social media is more important, in maybe not more important, but it becomes another piece. So I guess, where are these clients? How are they determining or ending up with you? I mean, it must be something that you're kind of thinking about and trying to reverse engineer, because they don't necessarily tell you
Yeah.
that. But it's just interesting to me how they end up making such a good call. They must be very pleased with themselves.
I don't think so. I think it's of course I put some thought into this. I think the hardest category to get traction on in terms of bringing people to you is the category that architects traditionally do the most work in, and that's in housing alterations and additions, right? So that is like, if we've had that project type out there, it's very hard to get people coming based on what they've seen of that project. Now, I think there's a few things about that. One is possibly there's so much of it out there. Secondly, I think people find it hard to make that leap of seeing a project of somebody else's whole housing alts and ads, and then seeing how it would translate to their own particular place. So it's hard for them to sort of make the sort of direct A to B to C connection. Where we've had the most luck is with types of projects that are more easily translatable. So the Trentham Longhouse is a classic example. So this long house, it's on a flat section in a recent subdivision. So people buying a flat piece of grass can really picture that house.
They go, hey,
on the
that looks like our flat piece of grass.
That's what we want. Yeah,
that's what we want.
And I can imagine a long house like that. So we get projects, from that. They don't end up with a long house, but that's the connection that they can make. So, and then that's happened with coastal places and country places, and then that probably why that's happening with the Frankston project, because it's been marketed as a mid-century project rather than an alts and ads project, which would have been harder to get the traction with that, I think. So that's what I think it is about. It's about making connections from people to the types of projects that you're doing and the types of projects that they want to do.
Yeah.
So any project we do, that's a lot. What I put a lot of thought into. What type of project is this? Not it's a new house, it's an alts and ads, but what is the particular thing of it? And often things like, obviously names can help like that. So Frankston mid-century, there's no accident. Locations really help, So if you put in a geographical location, that does tend to draw people to it as well. Those, the Good Life House is marketed very much as a suburban house.
Yeah.
Those kind of connections.
You're blowing my mind. You're doing like architectural SEO, trying to work out what's what's the keyword here,
Exactly.
what's the
Exactly.
niche.
What's the keyword? Yeah.
Frankston Modern
What's
is like we're trying to carve out a little gap in the market with a
yeah.
concept, with a with even just, as you mentioned, maybe just a name, maybe just an element. That's very, very interesting. Not many
I'll give you two
yeah,
examples
please
that
do.
we've dealt with in the past couple of weeks, right? So again, from that project, because that's like I said, that's just what I'm finding is that the effect of that project is starting to show up now. One project, a new house in Northcote, and the client, when he was a kid, I think, or in his 20s, lived in an Eichler house in Los Angeles. So that
Mm,
was his connection to it.
yep,
And then somebody else has got a Roy Grounds house in Toorak, and they're
yep,
looking to do something to it. There's two
yeah,
very different project types, but with that common thing of they were obviously looking for an architect,
yep,
liked mid-century or had a mid-century house, and then
yep.
found the way to us.
Okay, interesting. So, because you've mentioned, I even read an interview where you mentioned that how important, or how much you think about the fact that you within the fairly focused niche that you guys are in, which is kind of new homes and alts and additions and whatever. Within that, there is actually quite a variety of the different kinds of projects. You guys just don't do, extensions in Turak or whatever. It's not like
Right.
you're not doing a lot of the same. So I think you're actually there's quite a lot of variety in there. And is that something kind of, do you think that that's kind of a bit of a result about thinking about how you actually trying to I hate to say involving this marketing thinking into your design process, but I'm just going to call it as I hear it. It sounds like to a certain degree you're going, this would be a bit more original, a bit more interesting, and this will be easier. Oh, I'll maybe frame it the best way possible. This will make this project easier for certain groups of people to connect with. They'll have something that they can connect to, and they can sort of translate this into their own world, and that's what's going to make the project easier to communicate and communicate more strongly. So that variety, and I guess what that leads to for you is it sounds like not trying to repeat yourself. You're trying to go, okay, something new, something I haven't done before. Is that correct in terms of your thinking there?
I mean, I guess it's not, yeah, it's understanding they're not coming just because of capital A architecture. They're
Mm,
coming because of a house type you've done before.
mm,
And so what I've been doing now is my current thinking is to move away from new houses, alterations, additions, commercial, like just that kind of traditional bracketing,
yeah.
but to just house types. So houses in the city, houses in the country, houses by the coast. So that's the kind of the living type, I guess, that people would find themselves into projects that we've done in similar contexts. And I think that's what I'm sort of thinking about is it's really about that context of where the house is rather than if it's adding to or building new or in a subdivision or that's what people are thinking about when they start to
Yeah.
plan out their homes, I think.
That's how they actually separate themselves out into groups.
Yeah.
We have this industry structure of we separate you this way, but they're going, hey, I separate
Yeah.
around lifestyle or where my project
Yeah.
is or what the history of this place is. Like you're mentioning homes that are designed by, you know, 20th century architects is like a group of people that have a lot in common with each other and
Yeah.
they have an interest in your projects. They don't see themselves as, oh, I feel, I'm just like anybody who needs an extension. They have a much more particular thing that they're looking for. So you're kind of going, okay,
Uh,
they're a group of people that's different. And is this sort of thinking about focusing on these different groups? Is that kind of translating into? Oh, I mean, you seem to have thought through a lot of this stuff in a fair bit of detail. So is that kind of going into like Instagram stuff? Or is that going into how you think about media, website? Are you kind of changing
yeah.
the approach a little bit as far as this stuff goes? Like, how does this translate into something that you can then, you know, influence the process? I guess.
Okay. So what I have been thinking about this, and where I've been um, so my thinking has gone. Those are the three kind of contexts that people are living in, and they're trying to find an architect that's worked within that context,
Yeah.
right? So they're not coming because of the award or because you've used brick. They're coming because you've designed a house in that context. So you must have an expertise in that particular context, which we do. There's a lot of accumulated knowledge about how to build in the bush, or how to build in rural conservation zones, or how to build on a farm, how to build down the coast in sand, how to deal with septic systems. So appreciating that we do actually have a lot of information, and we're actually quite happy to share that information. So we're kind of using that thinking, like sort of promoting a bit, I guess, how you can do a good septic system when you're in sand. Like, that's not really flashy sort of stuff, but it's
where
really
are you doing
useful
that?
information.
You're writing informative blog posts. Where's this been happening?
So there's a couple of essays. We've sort of got general essays that we've been working on. So these things take time, Dave. I'm not fast mover on these things.
I know it. Absolutely.
But I wanted to do it in a generally informative way, and we're not even going to talk about our projects. We're just going to share the information. So that's been part of the thinking.
Just a role model for us all as far as architectural content marketing. I can't believe
only if you actually do it.
Well, yeah, I guess so, right? You can plan for it. I think it's the executing on it's the hard part. But I think a lot of architects think like, oh gosh, sitting down writing an essay on this, giving away this information for free. I'm always banging on to people about how they should be doing it, but I guess I do have a hard time sometimes connecting it with, how does this actually, I think the model you're talking about this is how we actually, there's expertise in these very specific niches. We need to demonstrate expertise in this area. That's what the prospective client is really going to pay attention to. That's very much going to mean something to them, and it's going to influence their decision making. That's why it's worth our time, because we've got the social media audience, we've got the awards, we've got the publications, but that stuff doesn't do X. It doesn't do this expertise thing that we need necessarily. Or is that correct? Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think that, it's sharing general information. I think that in my mind, how the journey goes, so you're a client and you're researching a new country home, and you're going to speak to some architects. So you come across us, and then you see this information. It gives you good background information about what you should know and what you should be asking. And then you go and chat to a few architects, and then you sort of come back to, a lot of that information was back on Antony's website, and that's quite good. So, we've spoken to these other architects. Now we understand how they work, but we're going to go back to MRTN. That's how I sort of imagine it. You're generous and you share a bit, but it also demonstrates expertise and helps people with the questions. And then they also go through that process and they come back better educated. Because the best clients that we've had have either worked with an architect before, gone down a terrible track, say with a design build company or something like that. So they've had a bad experience, but become such great clients after that, So to actually have sort of been involved and educated and know a bit more about things and then come into the process really helps. That's ideal. Not everyone has that. So a big part of our design process is at the beginning. We just go through an extended, let's pull this brief together, let's have a conversation, let's talk about all these assumptions that we will make during the design, and let you know what they are before we even get into it. So I like that, because it's kind of, I consider that part of the marketing as well. That's just sort of talking about what we do. But also it just sort of suspends that active design for as long as possible, which is always good.
So you have a lot of initial meetings. You've already kind of given them a fee proposal at that point. They're signed up, they're working with you, and then there's just a lot of talking and meetings and briefing and picking it all apart. So you do that for a little while before you start kind of being more actively designing.
Yeah, we do sort of like these return briefs, in a couple of packages. So
I want to go back to the expertise in the essays, because I think this is so interesting. So what's an example of one of these essays that use the word essay, which I think is firstly interesting because
Yeah,
I'm thinking, what does an essay on septic tanks look like?
yeah,
That's the
yeah,
first one I'm
yeah,
imagining.
yeah,
Are you thinking about structuring it like, okay, we're going to cover this entire niche or this entire topic, like the ultimate MRTN's ultimate guide to 50s modern extensions, or is it more like we're going to be very, very pinpointed on specific elements of that? So when you're doing a 50s extension, this is how you should handle flaws, and it's an article on that, right? Or what? So what?
yeah.
I
So
know you're at the
we've
planning stage, so
no, we've actually, there's two that have been completed on the website. So
yeah,
we've already done the house on the coast
yeah,
and a house in the country.
yeah,
So, for example, the house on the coast one, we talk about how it's a weekend home, like just the nature of using that house in the weekend and extended periods over Christmas.
yeah,
Look, of course, people might actually be living down on the coast. They're not going to become excluded from your essay just because you're pitching another kind of thing. Like we sort of
yeah,
assume some basic intelligence for that.
yeah,
So it's describing the kind of the why you're going to have a place on the coast. And then that kind of like jumping in the car on Friday and leaving everything behind and how you open it up, when
yeah,
you get there and how you close it down. So that's kind of that sort of, then that feeds into, big doors that open and lots of storage and where's the surfboards going to go and the different
mm,
types of storage. And then it talks, it's like just building that kind of, then we look at the weather where you are, like what's the predominant wind,
yeah.
it's probably southwesterly. What do we do about that? How we orientate, all those kind of things. So it becomes just from a wider scope of project aims down to, hey, you really also need to think about these specific things as well,
Mm.
and trying to share a bit of information about that. Septic, wildfire, materials, councils, planning. We try and give a bit of information there as well.
Is this well, that sounds really good because it just sounds very romantic in terms of,
Yeah,
really painting a picture there, but then going into those details as well.
yeah.
In choosing your focus and your subject matter, is this a strategy that you would adopt for a niche that you were interested in, but you maybe hadn't done any projects in? Because these essays don't, as you mentioned, don't discuss your projects directly. They're just informative, and they're just giving away information. But would you use it as a tool to expand into a new area, or would it be something that you do more on your pre-existing areas that you think are the most, important to the practice?
No, it's pre-existing. So I think
Yeah.
I'm kind of using it as a record of things that we've learned along the way.
Yeah.
As my memory becomes more and more crap, these things are down somewhere and I could refer to it
I
and
could refer
relearn
back
it.
to them. A client
Yeah,
asks, should we
like
have
the
nice wide open doors at our coastal
archives.
house? And you're like, let me just check my documents.
That's a good idea or not. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it is putting down things that we've been through
No.
and best experiences.
I'll just give you a warning as somebody who has a lot of lengthy articles written up on the internet that they clients have a tendency to use what you've said 3 years ago in an essay against you. When they'll be the first to point out the article they read last week, but you wrote 3 years ago. If
Yeah,
your thinking even changes a little bit over time, it's going to come back and bite you. So just
yeah,
be careful.
I know.
You
I
might
know
have to
you.
do
You
an
sort of
annual review just to just to make
exactly.
sure. Do we
This is
still
what you
believe
think.
this?
You write it and you go, I'm going to keep updating this, and of course
You
that
have
never
to.
happens. Yeah,
You
I'm
have
sure.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's crazy how fast you're particularly once you've written it, then you really start thinking about it and going, oh,
yes,
I've rethought this entirely just through the process of writing it, and then I start talking to people about it, then it changes again. So you're always going back and you're kind of updating. But I think if I was like to talk to architects about this idea of, okay, you should maybe think about sharing some of this expertise stuff through essays, for example, their first question would often be, but where do I put it? Where does it go? How do I get it out there?
yeah.
So those are the kind of the obvious next steps. But what are your sort of, what are your plans in terms of getting these essays into people's hands?
Yeah. So multi-forked.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the moment, they sort of reside in the website, and I'm going to build on that as we develop through. Then I was going to do the sort of Instagram story type of thing. That's pretty easy.
Yeah.
But I'm actually have been structuring them and writing them with the intent that they could be published somewhere, right?
Okay.
So there's, I don't know if it's, house, but, it could be, say, for example, the design files, might go, it'd be really handy if we actually had a how-to guide for how to build in the country.
Yeah.
And then to be able to publish that. And that's why it's sort of very specifically not being just MRTN focused, but very general.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the aim for it, that it has a general audience, or that kind of, I guess that sort of assumption of, a lot of this media at the moment is kind of lazy media, that
sure.
kind of experience of you're essentially writing project descriptions that get published in these platforms. So instead of having a project description, having a type description that could just then be taken and used somewhere else.
That's interesting.
And that kind of, it would find its way back somehow.
Yeah. Well, that's a good strategy in terms of getting it out there, that sort of guest publishing or syndicating it or whatever. But it's interesting choosing your publications. You would pick the local project because you like to go with the architecture publications. I would probably suggest Domain or realestate.com.au or one of these, 5 million visitor a month property websites. But that's not the MRTN
I actually
way.
meant the design files is actually what I meant to say. So
the design
like
files.
a really fantastic
we're
audience.
talking some really big numbers there at that point. So that's so interesting. So you might put it out that way and put it out on Instagram and everything. Are you going to keep, so you're going to do essay? Do you have like a bit of an idea of what your pipeline of upcoming kind of topics would be that are at an early stage right now of your thinking? Give us, can we have like a little bit of a preview of a couple ideas?
So one thing we've got to do suburbs, like a new house in the suburbs. So it's the 550 square meter block, and with existing house or non-existing house, there's heritage considerations we want to make. I'm also, like there's kind of passion projects that we've got that I'd like to then write a general essay on. So one thing that we do is we talk about, I love that kind of sitting down with a new client and they've got their 2-year-old and a 4-year-old on the iPad, and they'll try and talk about what Johnny's going to be doing. I'm like, when these kids, when your children move into this house, they're going to be 7 and 9, basically. Those are different kids, and then they're going to high school, and trust me, that's a different child. And then your kids can't afford to go flatting when they're at university. They're going to be at home. What does that look like? And we actually diagram that pretty early in how we're arranging the planning of the house. So like that would be quite fun to write a kind of essay on that kind of subject.
That's really, really interesting. So that's so cool because, I think also putting yourself in the shoes of those prospective clients that are kind of looking at you, looking at other architects. I already know what the other architects look like. Their only outlet, usually their main outlet for, I guess, talking about their expertise is their about page, right? Because we're kind of confined to that page and we get a couple hundred words where we get to describe it, but we have to be hitting alterations, additions, new houses, the odd cafe, the restaurant. So in the end of the day, we're talking to everybody. We're not really talking to anybody. We just have to have fairly general wishy-washy statements about light and air and livability and whatever, like the same sort of stuff you see everywhere. But what you're doing is thinking about the fact that you can have lots of tiny little micro niche segments within your potential customer base, and you can kind of craft a very in-depth experience for each of them individually because you're aware of who they are, you know how they're going to come to your website, and you go, okay, I'm not just going to give you I don't have to treat you, just because you're all here from different groups, I don't have to just give you this one diluted message for all of you. I can send you down these little rabbit holes and give you some very, very interesting information. So that's just such a good idea of that segmentation and you thinking about those segments. It's really interesting to see how that's working. I'm also just impressed that you're doing it. Like writing is very time consuming, and I would actually be interested to think about, now you've finished 2 articles and they're up on the blog. How did you do it?
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any advice?
I might just backtrack just a little bit now. Sort of chatting with you and thinking about it. I guess the things that we've been sort of we are most interested about writing down and sort of sharing is the things that are not aesthetic things at all, right? So it's about not the things you can point to in a glossy photo. So that planning stuff is all sort of sits in the background. So it's that kind of what sits in the background of projects. Like I'd also love to do another project about heat pump technology and no gas in our houses and stuff. I've yet to get a very sexy photo of the heat pumps that we're using out the back of our houses.
But
so
you have a lot
think,
of sexy conversations about heat pumps that aren't going anywhere.
Not as sexy as my septic system conversations, I can assure you. So I think that it's interesting. Maybe that's the kind of the theme of what we're trying to do. So how did I do it? So I don't consider myself a very strong writer, but I do enjoy it. Like from time to time, I do enjoy it. But look, I just did the lazy thing actually. So over a number of weeks, I'd just always have a pad beside me, and I would just bullet point things down. And sometimes I would extend it out, and often not. Then I would just type out those bullet points and arrange them by group. So just cutting and pasting. So I had a general arrangement to them. And then I paid this really lovely student, Michaela, a contract rate to write it up for me. So brilliant. I outsourced that part of it, and she did an amazing job.
Oh, that's amazing. So you did the thinking, you did the structuring. Michaela did the final execution, the expansion of those bullet points. And so how did you work with Michaela in terms of were you a lot of architects can have quite perfectionist, some might say micromanagey tendencies when it comes to delegating certain things to other people, and a general distrust of others to be able to do things to the level that they believe they can. So there's often, particularly with writing, there's this sense, there can be sometimes a concern of like, oh, well, are they really going to understand our thinking? Our thinking is so it's so personal, it's so coming from us, how's somebody else going to possibly? So anyway, how did you kind of navigate that?
It was funny. So when I got my first draft back, I opened it up and I was like, oh, this is basically what I've sent to Michaela. It's just reformatted. I didn't realize she started with the bit that I'd sent her and the essay was further down. And then she actually, I guess the way I did handle it was she came into the office a couple of times. We had a good chat about it. We had a really good phone call and talked about what we were trying to achieve, and I had quite a bit of conversation about the voice to use. She didn't have architecture experience, so she wasn't going to intuitively be able to elaborate on the concepts that we were talking about. But we were able to talk about the voice that I was hoping to come across. And she was very good at tuning into that. So when she returned it, she added quite a bit to it. She really took it on as a writing project, which I was really impressed by. But I think that my touchstone, however, is that I will always put those bits of writing, give them to my wife to read, who's a lawyer, right? She's got nothing to do with architecture. Like, not nothing, she's actively involved in my life, but she does have that radar and that detector of, no, this is just archi speak. This is meaningless. It's just, especially a lawyer, they're quite good on their plain speaking. So that I rely on her more for my final edit than I do myself, if you like. Because also she's going to let me know if the ideas and concepts are coming across or not. So I guess my tips would be give it to somebody else to write, somebody else to edit. Minimize involvement.
No, that's really good. So did you and Michaela
I uploaded it to the website.
Yeah, you did that bit. And took the credit. That's always the fun part as well. So when you and Michaela ended up finally getting comfortable after your discussion about kind of the tone of voice, was there any sort of simple way that you ended up encapsulating it, or was it just a general we're on the same page, it's unspoken, but we both kind of get it? Or did you guys have like an actual system or process? I think that
there was an intermediate edit where you just have to be, you have to be respectful of people's feelings, obviously, but also you have to go, this is probably a bit too much. Like we need to tone this down. that was, like a reasonable conversation to have.
Yeah.
But it was, no, it was a really satisfying way to do it. I mean, it's that thing too. It's like photography. When you get a project photographed, to actually put my thoughts into a bullet point form and then someone return it to me as a composed essay was a nice experience. It's good.
So yeah, no, I can imagine. So what were those? What sort of things ended up coming down on the page in your bullet points as you were kind of going with things? Because you've obviously taken on a pretty big topic. So you've gone living on the coast, for example. Are you then? Do your bullet points start at that top level, like connection to nature, what you're going to be doing during the day? Like, are you just starting at that kind of top level?
Correct.
Then within that, you're then bullet pointing inside of that as
Correct.
well. Okay.
That's how starting with that. Yes. What is a country house? What does it mean to live in the country? What that connection to landscape I talked about. Then it's like, how do you use a country house? And then it goes into a bit into the mudroom, and then it's the environment and the climate and that kind of thing, and down into those details as you get into it. And then something nice to conclude.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I write stuff as well, because I hate the thought of going, oh, my goal is to write about 3,000 words on this topic. How the hell am I going to do that? But when you break it down into much more manageable chunks, you go, oh, I can write 75 words about
Yeah,
materials. Like, come on, I could write
exactly.
1,000 words about materials. So you start to look at all those dot points and you go, oh, cool, I can actually deal with each of them. But then often, you can have a great outline, but then you go, oh, but God, it's going to take me time to write this. And that's where kind of having that assistance helped as well. I think a lot of people, when they ask me about where do I get a copywriter from, they're like, oh, well, it needs to be, do you know any good architecture writers or whatever? But it doesn't really need to be that. When I've worked with writing people, they haven't been architects,
Oh,
and so you found that was absolutely fine. Like no major issues there, right? You don't need like somebody who's marketing themselves as I'm an architecture writer.
no,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be probably not wary of that, but you no, it was not necessary at all. I think that again, just as I'm sort of thinking here, I think that it builds on experience actually of having given project presentations over a number of years now, right? So that's where my writing experience comes through. And, I'm constantly surprised at how, to be honest, how badly a lot of other architects do this. When they come in and you're presenting a project, how do you present a project? And it's not that, this is the front door where we walk down the hallway. It's not engaging to listen to, and it's not a great way to present a project. So it's a bit cliched. Well, I think it's cliched. Is that sort of narrative aspect? Everything should have a narrative. People are after stories and relate to stories, and that's how we put together our projects, and that's how we get people, paying attention and the talks that we give and presentations that we give. So I think that then comes into, okay, so if we're going to write a sort of generic essay about the subject, let's create a bit of a narrative. Let's make a bit of a magazine article to it. I mean, I think I've been a long subscriber to the New Yorker, and that's like my I'm just going to retire when I get the New Yorker profile. For me, that is the zenith of achievement. But
That's
but you
cool.
look at that writing. There is a style to that writing. There's a pattern to it, and there's a way that it's done, and it's not complicated.
Yeah. Well, that would be a good actual, if people aren't sort of regularly reading the New Yorker now, they can go and kind of look at those articles and get how do you make things into an interesting story. And I think when you're looking at a real project or doing a project writing that involves a real client, your story has a hero, right? It has this main character, this protagonist, and this is their house, and it's kind of thinking about it. And again, in that Anthony Richardson interview, he also was talking about that sort of stuff as well. So it's an ongoing theme now. We're kind of talking about this storytelling thing because it is quite hard to unpack. Like, what is storytelling when you actually try and do it? How do you do that in an essay where you're talking about a topic? You're trying to you're trying to make it informative so that it can be used as a sort of a reference thing that people can look at it and they can learn from it and kind of be educated by it, but you don't have a real person. What are some of the strategies that you guys found work in terms of getting it to feel like it has a story, it's a narrative?
Yeah. So I think that what I do, when I'm trying to get that part of it right, I imagine I'm sitting, in the meeting room behind me with a person that's come, said we've just bought a property out of Kyneton and we want to build a country house. And I have them in the office and I'm giving the sales talk, and it's not, you should come to us because of X, Y, and Z, and we've done all this great work. That's not the conversation we have with potential clients when we come in. We get them in and we talk about the process and the things to look out for and providing that expertise. I think that's probably where the project was born from, was just putting down on paper a lot of those conversations that we have with new clients.
And that, if you've got that connection between, because the other thing that's happening in that meeting, that it is that sales pitch, but as far as your sales pitch goes, I imagine that it's basically just about building rapport, right, and chemistry and connecting with the person who's sitting across from you, because you've got that opportunity to build that sense of trust, and so that also putting, kind of getting them to open up a little bit, imagining their situation, all that kind of thing. So you're just trying to, does that help then when you're doing writing, to actually think, well, there's a reader here, and whether they're on their device or they're on their computer or they're sitting in my conference room, there's sort of some equivalence between those different modes of communication, right? So you're not adopting this kind of, well, I have to write essays in a certain, there's no individual anymore. I write essays in this very broadcasty kind of way. You're thinking, okay, I'm speaking to a person here.
That's right. And I guess I can imagine some people would fall into the trap of thinking, oh, if I'm going to give them this information, like I have to make sure it's absolutely correct, and like with the footnotes and the references and all that. The point of it is to provide a little bit of information, but you need more, right? So it's enough to know to start asking the right questions, and that's what it's about. So, and it's the same in that kind of initial sort of meeting, is that you're having these conversations and all you're sort of talking about is these things that we are going to be looking into in a lot of detail together once we actually start working together. So in those meetings, I will say, we'll have a general chat about the conversation, but I say, I'm not taking any notes. I'm not going to write down what your needs are at this stage, because that's going to come later. And I also say, I'm not really going to run through completed projects of ours, because you can have a look on the website and see what those are. What we're going to do is we're just going to talk about how we would work together and show some examples of that working together.
Wow. And how,
I think that's what,
how much content do you have? To. How much content do you have on that topic? Do you have like a solid 10 minutes of
yeah.
like
that's so we about that process, or
in terms of, if you're just going to have a conversation, an initial conversation just devoted to, here's how we're going to work together. We're not going to talk about what you need yet. We're not going to talk about what we do. We're not going to talk about our projects. All this other stuff, that's later. Right now, it's just going to be process. Just this working relationship between the two of us. That's pretty. It suggests that you must have kind of meticulously thought through that process aspect of things to be able to say that much about it, right?
Yeah. So I want to, wherever possible, de-stress the situation. I guess just for myself and for them as well, right? And any time that like a client is like, okay, what things do I need to think about? What's my attitude towards light and dark and materials? That becomes a charged situation and becomes quite difficult if those people haven't really thought through those things or to the detail that you might. So we just sort of say, we'll just do that. We'll do that together. Just give me we'll just chat about your place. And because I'm not taking notes, it's all very sort of informal, but obviously very helpful at that stage. And then also from us, like I literally say, you can see the finished projects, you can look at the photos, and it's a shame you can't visit them, but you're probably interested in how we got to that point. And so we'll run through I just got a bunch of different examples of how we look at res code, how we look at heritage overlays, how we discern a budget. Just these kind of things that putting it together, how big is a house, what's a bedroom, all these kind of things. So just conversation points that we can then build together the information.
Wow. And so now you've gone, okay, well, this approach has worked very, very well, and now we're adapting it we're sort of scaling it and making it, we're sort of taking something that happens organically, one-on-one. It's very labor intensive, and going, we could actually create kind of a carbon copy of this that sits on our website, or something like this, emulates this, and that can be doing that at 12 o'clock on a Friday night while someone's sitting on their couch, just come from Instagram. They can be experiencing some of that content while you're, relaxing, taking it easy.
Yeah, that's it.
Are you afraid that somebody's going to read your essays, then come into the office and you're going to start the pitch and they're going to be like, no, heard it before.
We know this already.
Skip this one.
Exactly. I don't think they're that good.
That's so interesting. Well, was it I'm not going to ask about like Michaela's hourly rates, but was it, you're looking down the barrel of, okay, we're going to be creating some long form content. These aren't 200 word, blog posts. These are things that are going to be putting quite a lot of work into. They're going to be evergreen, to use a bit more jargon. Like, they're not going to be something that's relevant for 4 weeks and then disappears off the face of the earth. It's like, we're going to be using these as part of our communication and marketing material for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So it merits like a bit of investment of time and money. Is it a big project for you to embark on working on these essays, or is it, something that you found a way that it can be quite manageable?
Well, the honest answer, I think, is that, like, I know that I have to redo the website and a lot of, this is a big project that's kind of weighing on my mind. Yeah. So I know there's a lot of content that needs to be created and edited, and conversation that needs to be had around that, which is kind of, I do find slightly overwhelming. So it was really about chipping away at that task before it comes up, because it's a lovely idea to have, and then to try and do it at the same time you're creating a new website or brand and identity, I think it would be too much. So it's just about putting in the vault some things that are going to become more to the fore later on. And that's so that not and like that, understand not everything has to be fresh. Like, not everything has to come out at the same time. It can sort of be eked out as it comes available.
So you're kind of starting on some of the more difficult or time intensive parts of that overall sort of rebranding project as well. And so you were mentioning to me earlier that it started off with going, hey, maybe we could sort of refresh our website a little bit or something. It started off fairly innocent, your kind of marketing refresh, and now it started to scope creep out into, you're thinking about the name, you're thinking about the branding. What are you doing? Almost embarking on a kind of complete overhaul at this point, or what's the plan with sort of this year and sort of rebranding?
I'm dipping my toe into that, whether we're going to do that. I think that it's that loose thread on the sweater. When you start to peel it, and everything sort of unravels. So, like, it's been 10 years, so things could change and be refreshed. And, like, even with yourself, I've done a few of the website reviews and just tweaked things as I've gone along, which has been really, really helpful. But I think it's, again, not to use that term hobby, because actually it's not a hobby. It's a passion thing that we spend a lot of time in, and it's, when we travel, we go visit buildings, right? When we do the photo shoot, it's interesting because we're doing the photos. And when we do the website and the branding stuff, it's because we're quite sort of connected to that as a design exercise as well. And I'm quite excited about working with somebody else and the thinking they'd bring into it. It's not. It's not just so that people, Tom and Sally on the couch, find their way to us. for that part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that
So,
I'm conscious of not making it a website for architects, though, Dave. But,
well, you're making it for yourself, I think. So inadvertently,
yeah,
you kind of are making it for architects. In a way.
maybe.
You're going,
Maybe.
I'm going to find a designer that
One
I
particular
really,
architect.
yeah, yeah. You're going to find a
Yeah.
designer that's probably going to quote you $75,000 to redo your website, but you're going to be like, I don't care. I love their work. I'm going to,
Yeah,
even if we have to do it
me and
5 hours
you.
a month for 10 years, just chipping away at it, we'll get it done eventually. No, but
Yeah.
that's like a really interesting way to look at it. I think the reason, I wanted to have a chat to you in general was that I find it, you seem to have a very positive attitude towards marketing, communication, sharing your work online. You don't begrudge it, and you don't go, oh, this is a waste of time for me, or I'm more important, I should be doing better things. You're quite personally invested, and I sort of look at it and go, well, that's what makes it quite effective. It's effective because you feel like Anthony gives a shit. Anthony gives a shit. Sorry, that you're kind of there, you're present, and you care about it. And is that something that you've thought about, like in terms of, are there days where you sometimes go, yeah, I don't know if I can be bothered with this. I've got enough on my plate. Or do you kind of look at this stuff and go, hey, this is the part of running a business that I enjoy, and it's a bit of a treat to do some of these things. There's probably some gray area in the middle, but
Yeah. I mean, I'm not too analytical about it. I
yeah,
do like some personality to come through in it. But then I'm also cognizant of advice about how to do it and how to do it better.
mm,
So yeah, no, there's no real, no real methodology apart from trying to put something up every few days.
yeah,
That's it. I mean, like I enjoy the interface of it. Like I enjoy the medium of Instagram, which is really
yeah,
the only one we sort of use,
yeah,
and that sort of seeing other people's work and getting response back to yours. It's sort of enjoyable. And I mean, like I think that as architects we are really visual. Like I know that pretty shocking at remembering names, but very good at sort of remembering a
yeah,
project that had this aspect or that one and going back to it. And
yeah.
I think that's that kind of visual library that we're all building together as architects.
What, uh, given that Instagram is such a big part of your online presence, um, has your point of view on Instagram or your enjoyment of Instagram changed over time? Are you at a happy place with Instagram at the moment? Are you kind of down in the dumps about it a little bit? Like, where are you sort of? Because I know people's feelings towards it as a marketing platform, or even just a place to share your work and have an audience, can be very, yeah, very unpredictable sometimes. So,
I
do
think
you think?
that
Yeah,
like I say, when I think when we um, my thinking when I'm using it is I'm really chatting to a group of friends that are architects,
yep,
but I'm highly aware that we're now getting clients and potential clients just following along for a while, you know,
mm,
and playing along,
yep,
and I really like that. I really like that when we're having these meetings. How did you hear about us? And I'm like, well, we've been following on Instagram for a while,
yep,
so I know, they know where I've been on a holiday recently. They
yeah,
know the few projects that we've got and awards. It's kind of like they're coming and we've been kind of little friends for a while. Now
yeah.
we're going to
Are,
become bigger friends.
are you a big stories guy? Are
No,
you?
no,
No.
no.
Okay. So you find
Yeah,
do you find that
you're probably
personal?
telling me I should be, Dave.
Oh, I'm not telling you anything. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you how to use Instagram, Mister 15,000 followers. You can come on here and tell us how to do it. But so people still feel like they're personally connected with you. But I look down your feed and it's kind of, I don't see a lot of you in there. But that must
Right?
be where you must make it up in the captions, right? You speak from the heart.
Yep,
Is that it?
yep, yep,
And
yep,
so that's how they
yep.
feel like
Totally.
they're not just following a portfolio that's getting pushed out in the Instagram feed. They're going, oh, Anthony's a real guy. This is I'm following a person here who has a life like me or like one of my friends.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so
I think that's what we're trying to work at. You can also just not beating yourself up about it, though. Like when you can add an interesting, informative caption, do, but you're not going to every time. So then you put some eye candy up.
Yeah, what is your absolute minimum viable caption look like? What is your laziest? It's 4:45 on a
like
Friday afternoon, and you're going, oh shit, I haven't posted this week. Got to put something up.
name of the project, builder, photographer, out. That's it.
That's it. You go. Oh, I'll get him again on Monday.
I did
That's
try
cool.
for a while. I was doing that. I think it was on your recommendation as well. Later,
Oh,
like the scheduling posts,
yeah.
which was good for a while, but I've stopped doing that. I'm
You
just
just
doing
found it
them
easier
myself.
to just do it directly. Why
Yeah.
is that, out of curiosity? Because usually people find, well, actually, I'll say quite often the people that find later a bit of a revolution are the people that were never posting on their own in the first place, and it's a big step up from, I just don't have the time to, or I can't sit down and get some posts posted, so I'm never posting. 3 weeks goes by and I realize I haven't posted in 3 weeks. So there's a lot of architects that are in that camp. And then later comes along, they can sit down and focus for an hour or two and they'll schedule up posts for like 3 months. So that's a big benefit to them. But you were already very consistent and posting anyway. So
Yeah.
you just came onto later and you were like, oh, it's not really doing anything that, yeah.
I, I don't know if you perceive this, but I sort of go off accounts where I can tell that somebody else is doing it, or it's just been
Don't
programmed.
say that, mate.
It gives sort of.
I,
Why is that not a
bloody
good thing
pay
to
the rent
say?
on managing Instagram accounts, Andy. You should be telling me what great accounts
So
they are.
those are my favorites, the ones that are on robot.
Yeah, the ones that you're running are the best ones. But aside from those ones, they're just awful.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. I'm with you. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. I agree absolutely with what you mean about that. So you just, what is it about? Is it just the fact that you're going, where's the person here? Or is that what's kind of missing? You're just
Yeah, I
going
think what
like,
it
yeah,
is. I think it's like, I guess I know for myself, I'm sitting here thinking about a project or thinking about a photo, and I'm like, oh, I should share that. Or,
yeah,
I'm thinking about a particular, like entries or something like that. So I will put one up on it. So I know that there's kind of like a connection to what I'm doing at the time. And it sounds so touchy feely.
no,
It's something I'm thinking about or liking, and then I share it. And when you get those posts that it's just like, well, it's a Wednesday, so we do the exterior shot, it
yeah,
comes through. And I think that the tone of the accounts changes.
yeah. No, that's interesting. And do you feel like Instagram as a portion of, I suppose, where your new business comes from? Do you think it's a meaningful portion of where you sort of see your clients coming from these days?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Was there
Absolutely. I
like
mean,
was there a turning point or any point where that started to really come into effect? Was there like 3 years at the beginning on Instagram where you're like, oh, this is rubbish. This isn't doing anything. I'm just doing this for my own entertainment. And then was there a point where it started to become like, oh, wait a minute, we're actually getting people that only know us from Instagram? Or has it just been a gradual kind of journey over time?
I mean, I got pretty excited really early on. We had our double monk shoe project and put a photo of that
Yeah.
up before it was photographed. And
Yeah.
Artichoke magazine contacted us right away to publish. That was
Mm,
like, okay, I'm getting this now. Um, but in terms of people um, following and then coming around to that, now we're ready to do a project thing, is actually pretty recent. Like I
yeah.
would say, even last 2 years, 18 months kind of thing,
Yeah.
actually. So, I mean, it's that kind of, Ray from Archibiz talks about this, that kind of
Mm,
that curve of people of, most people don't want to do a project and not interested in it. There's
yep.
a big bunch of people that at some point in the future want to do something, and then
Yep.
a smaller percentage of people that are ready to do it. And you're trying to get those people that are thinking about it at some point in the future to come to you when they're like, yes, we're ready to do it.
Yep.
And I think that's uh, who I am thinking about when
Yeah.
in Instagram.
You're playing the long game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You're not
and they're
thinking
playing
specific.
along.
Yeah, you're not going, okay, I'm looking for the people that are right now sitting down, very first time finding an architect. You're going, no, that's chumps game. You've got to work, and that's too small a group of people anyway to begin with. You've got to work with a larger, the sort of the all the people in the next over the next 2 years, 3 years that are going to embark upon doing a project. They're the ones that I can be speaking to right now. If you're patient, right, and you're kind of putting out good content. It's very
That's it.
different. It's very different content for that audience for that audience as well, isn't it? Because the idea of them doing their own project hasn't even really occurred to them yet. They're going to do it at some point in the future, but they're just kind of bumbling along, sort of interested in architecture, right? And I guess that is where the Instagram account comes in quite well for you, because it's just they can just kind of voyeuristically just sort of look at your work and
Yeah, but I
nothing
think
too
that
serious.
I I sort of get. Um, I don't think they are bumbling along actually. So I think that like if you've bought a recent new subdivision outside of Trentham, that's the fat piece of grass.
Yep.
You've been thinking about that lifestyle change. You've been thinking about
Yep.
what you might be doing in a few years' time. And then you're starting to think about, well, if I was to do that, what would my house be like? So I think there's actually some quite specific thinking that goes into that point where I'm now ready to consider a project.
Yep.
And I think, yeah, that's what I believe.
Can I also just add that I agree with you in that
Okay.
I think people do. I think there's that kind of characterization, right? That this stuff happens very, or somebody goes looking for, somebody goes looking for an architect the way I decide, I'm going to go looking for a new desk, right? When my desk breaks, like there's this
Yeah.
sort of, oh, it just happened right away. There's not a lot of forethought that's gone into it, but what you've mentioned a few times throughout this conversation is that you sort of see this very long journey that a lot of these clients are going on, and that
Yeah.
eventually kind of brings them to you. But that starts much longer than I don't hear many other architects thinking about it this way. That this 1, 2, 3 years out, the belief that somebody's actually starting to really seriously contemplate these issues of what they want and where they're going to live and what kind of house they would like and all that sort of stuff. So that's interesting that's sort
Yeah.
of at the base of what you're thinking and informing your strategies.
I think my headphones have done the bip thing. I'm
Oh
gonna.
no, we've lost AirPod batteries.
Oh no, I saw. No, it seemed to be all right.
Are you back? We're back. Yeah,
Just
no,
make
all
sure
good.
you can hear me.
That's always a
Okay.
good time to get
I think
to
that.
wrap it up soon. But yeah, go on.
No, so I think that also part that thinking also has to be in a scenario where oh, we're going to buy a place outside of Trentham. Just use that example again. We're now living in Brighton, and we'll watch along, right? But not to say someone's going to pivot and go, no, we've decided we'll do the extension on Brighton anyway. They're still sort of engaged and they're still sort of thinking about you. So that there's no sort of lost direction on that kind of that thinking about it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So even if they do end up even if their decision making isn't they're not completely locked in. They're still a little bit unsure about what they're going to do. They've got room to kind
Yeah.
of go in a few different directions, but you don't care. You're still there communicating with them. You see the value in a client that is still in that very initial research and developing their interest phase, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Engaged in it.
That's good. Well, I think that's such a good, you know, I think what's so interesting is just the way you think so much about clients and their state of mind. I get that strongly from you in a way that I don't, that connecting with them, identifying with them, thinking, what are they going through? What are they looking for? Sometimes, architects, when we're trying to process what are these clients looking for, all that we can kind of connect to is, well, sometimes people mention that they worked with a builder or they worked with an architect and they didn't really listen to them. So what clients really want is to be listened to, right? And it's always just this, we might just grab onto this one little thing, but you're kind of thinking big picture, going, no, I've got this much bigger theory about the kind of journey that these clients are going on. That's so interesting. I'm impressed. I'm really into it.
Yeah.
Is that? I think that could be.
That's well put. I think that's actually really that's absolutely right. So that and that's the way that I like to think how we engage with clients. And that's definitely how I instruct the team here about how we communicate with clients. So we're a service industry. So I'm very much, we are service, they are clients. We have to make them happy and manage expectations and keep them informed. So that's central to what we do.
Anthony, thank you very much. It was awesome speaking to you. Now, do you
No,
want to
you're
promote?
welcome.
Where should people come and? Yeah, I mean, your Instagram account, obviously. They should come to your blog and read your essays. Can they, or do you want them to wait until you've got a new website before they come there and start
No,
reading
they're
that
all
stuff?
on there. They can find the essays on the website. That's they're in there. There's a few about sort of ESD design and coastal design and country, hopefully city soon. So there'll be some more coming up.
Well, thank you very much. we lost the AirPods. That's perfect timing. Thank you so much, Anthony. And I hope to have you on again sometime in the future.
Okay.
Perfect ending.